Jimi Hendrix was the undisputed king of rock, a global icon who had reached a level of success most artists could only dream of. He had everything: fame, influence, and a legacy that was already set in stone. Yet, just 3 days before his death, he gave an interview that painted a completely different picture of his life. Instead of celebrating his achievements, Hendrix spoke with a strange, unsettling clarity about things he had never mentioned before. He seemed to be looking past the fame and into something much darker, describing a reality that was becoming increasingly difficult to navigate. It wasn't the talk of a man at the top of the world, but someone who had discovered something deeply troubling about the path he was on. But what did he reveal that was so disturbing? Why did his final message feel less like an interview and more like a warning? Join us as we look into the final words of Jimi Hendrix. The one-string ukulele. Why a piece of garbage became Jimi Hendrix's greatest treasure. Jimi Hendrix was a rock legend who changed everything, but before the fame, he was just a kid in Seattle, clutching a broomstick like a guitar. It's a sad image, a boy standing in his elementary school hallway, strumming the air because the music in his head was already louder than the world around him. His teachers thought it was a security blanket, and a social worker even begged the school to buy him a real guitar. She warned that without one, he might be scarred for life. But the school said no, and his father, Al, wouldn't buy him one either. Jimi was left in a silence that he had to fill with his own imagination. This struggle started at home, in a family that was falling apart. Jimi's mother, Lucille, was only 17 when he was born, and her relationship with his father was a total mess. Jimi was often sent to live with relatives just to get away from the fighting. Eventually, his mother left for good, and he only saw her once in a while. But even in all that chaos, Jimi found a way to escape through the blues. In 1957, while helping his father haul away trash, he found an old ukulele in the garbage. It only had one string, but to Jimi, it was a treasure. He sat for hours playing that one single string to Elvis Presley songs, teaching himself how to find a melody in the middle of a tough life. The year 1958 brought a pain that stayed with him forever. His mother passed away at only 33 years old. It was a crushing loss, but his father didn't offer a hug or a kind word. Instead, he gave Jimi a shot of whiskey and told him that was how men deal with loss. He wouldn't even let Jimi go to the funeral. In that same dark year, Jimi finally got his first real acoustic guitar for $5. It was a small thing, but it changed history. He played it for hours every single day, watching other players and listening to old blues records, absorbing every note until he could play them himself. As he got older, his dreams got bigger. He started his first band, the Velvetones, but there was a big problem. He was playing an acoustic guitar, and the rest of the band was so loud that nobody could hear him. He knew he needed to go electric. Finally, his father gave in and bought him a white electric guitar. Jimi was ready to show the world what he could do, but he was almost too good. At his very first gig, he was actually fired in the middle of the show just for showing off on stage. He was already playing the future, and the people around him just weren't ready for it yet. But just as he was finding his sound, Jimi got into some serious trouble. Before he was 19, the police caught him twice in stolen cars. The judge gave him a tough choice: go to prison or join the Army. Jimi chose the Army. He became a paratrooper in the famous 101st Airborne, but he didn't care about being a soldier. All he cared about was his guitar. He begged his father to send his red guitar to the military base, and once it arrived, he wouldn't put it down. He spent so much time playing that the other soldiers started to pick on him. They even hid his guitar just to make him beg for it back. While he was in the Army, something happened that changed his life. A fellow soldier named Billy Cox heard Jimi playing and was blown away. He said the sound was like a mix of old blues and classical music. They started a band and played at clubs on the base, but Jimi's heart just wasn't in the military. He was caught sleeping on the job and ignored his orders. Finally, the Army gave up on him and let him go, saying he would never be a good soldier. Jimi told people he left because he broke his ankle during a parachute jump, but the truth was simpler. He was meant to be a rock star, not a soldier. He walked away with nothing but his guitar and a sound that would soon change the world forever. But while the discipline of the military couldn't contain him, the restless energy of the Southern music scene provided the perfect training ground for his revolution. Jimi wasn't content to just play the notes. He wanted to command them, trading the rigid life of a paratrooper for a restless journey through the heart of American rhythm and blues. The electric legend, from the Chitlin Circuit to Woodstock. By September 1962, Jimi was finally free from the Army. He reunited with his old friend Billy Cox, and they headed to Tennessee to start a band called the King Casuals. This was where Jimi's stage show started to get wild. He saw other guitarists playing with their teeth, and not wanting to be outdone, he learned how to do it himself. He later joked that in Tennessee, you had to play with your teeth, or you might get shot, leaving a trail of broken teeth all over the stage. It was dangerous, it was loud, and it was exactly where he needed to be. The band eventually moved to Nashville, the heart of the R&B scene. For the next 2 years, Jimi traveled what people called the Chitlin Circuit. These were small, tough venues throughout the South. He wasn't the star yet. He was a hired hand, playing guitar behind legends like Sam Cooke and Ike and Tina Turner. He was learning how to be a professional, but he was also getting restless. He was tired of following the rules of other band leaders. He wanted to do things his own way. In 1964, Jimi took a leap of faith and moved to Harlem in New York City. He was broke, but determined. He met a woman named Faye, who gave him a place to stay and encouraged his music. Things started looking up when he won first prize at the famous Apollo Theater Amateur Contest. Soon after, he landed a job with the Isley Brothers. He even recorded a song called Testify with them, but it didn't become a hit. Still, it was the first time his guitar playing was captured on a record, and people were starting to notice that this kid was different. Jimi spent 1964 and 1965 bouncing from one band to another. He played for Little Richard, but the two of them clashed constantly. Little Richard didn't like Jimi's flashy clothes or his wild movements on stage. Jimi was even fired by Richard's brother for being late and showing off too much. He then joined Curtis Knight and the Squires, where he signed some messy contracts that would cause him legal headaches later on. But through all the drama, he was developing a sound that no one had ever heard before, a mix of blues, soul, and something totally alien. By 1966, Jimi moved to Greenwich Village in New York, a place where artists were free to be weird. He started his own band called Jimi James and the Blue Flames. It was here that he was spotted by Chas Chandler, the bass player for a big British band called the Animals. Chas knew he had found a superstar. He convinced Jimi to fly to London, promising to make him a legend. In London, they formed the Jimi Hendrix Experience with 2 British musicians, Noel Redding and Mitch Mitchell. Suddenly, Jimi was the talk of the town. Rock royalty like the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and Eric Clapton would show up just to watch him play. He wasn't just a guitarist, he was a force of nature. In 1967, his first single, Hey Joe, became a massive hit in Britain, followed quickly by Purple Haze. He went back to America and stunned the crowd at the Monterey Pop Festival, ending his set by famously setting his guitar on fire. It was a moment that changed rock music forever. Over the next few years, Jimi became a global superstar. He released legendary albums like Axis, Bold as Love, and Electric Ladyland, which featured his famous cover of Bob Dylan's All Along the Watchtower. But the pressure was building. His band split up in 1969, but he kept moving. That same year, he gave his most iconic performance at the Woodstock Festival. As the sun came up, he played a distorted, screaming version of The Star-Spangled Banner that left the crowd speechless. It was a masterpiece of sound and emotion. Towards the end of 1969, Jimi formed a new group called the Band of Gypsies with his old Army friend Billy Cox. He even built his own recording studio, Electric Lady, in New York, so he could experiment with new sounds whenever he wanted. He was working on a new project called First Rays of the New Rising Sun, trying to reach a new level of music. But as we saw from those final haunting interviews, the weight of the world was catching up to him. Jimi Hendrix was a man who had reached the stars, but the journey had taken everything he had left to give. But while his fingers were busy rewiring the DNA of rock and roll, it was the people behind the curtain who kept him grounded enough to fly. Behind every legendary riff and every smashed guitar was a story of love, loyalty, and the women who saw the genius in Jimi long before the rest of the world caught his spark. The women behind the legend. Jimi Hendrix only lived to be 27, but he packed several lifetimes of mystery into those few years. While the world focused on his fingers flying across the guitar strings, there was a whole other side to him, the private man and the women who stood by him. Jimi never married, but he was never truly alone. Over the years, there have even been claims that he left behind more than just music. A Swedish singer named James Sundquist was legally declared Jimmy's son by Swedish courts in 1975, later suing the estate for a piece of the inheritance. Then there's Jimi Hendrix, another alleged daughter, though her claims were denied in court back in 1972. It seems the road life of a rock star was full of passing flings, but a few specific women truly touched his soul. The first was Betty Jean Morgan. She was his high school sweetheart, the girl he left behind when he went into the Army. Jimmy was so head over heels that he hand-painted her name on his red silver-tone guitar. It was a sweet, youthful kind of love, the kind that survives in old letters and painted wood. Later, when he moved to Harlem to chase his big break, he met Faye. She was the one who looked after him when he was just another struggling musician, providing the shelter and encouragement he needed to keep going before the world knew his name. But as Jimmy's star began to rise, the women in his life became his biggest champions. Take Linda Keith, for example. She was a former girlfriend of Keith Richards from the Rolling Stones, and the moment she saw Jimmy play, she knew he was a genius. She didn't just date him, she made it her mission to get him noticed. She famously said she was determined to make sure he got a record deal and blew everybody's mind. Without Linda's belief in him, the Hendrix we know today might never have made it to the big stage. Then came the woman who many consider the true love of his life, Kathy Etchingham. They met on the very first night Jimmy arrived in London in 1966. For 2.5 years, they shared a flat in Mayfair, and it was surprisingly domestic. While the world saw a wild rock god, Kathy saw a gentle man who liked to play Monopoly and Risk. She was his muse too. One night, they had an argument over her cooking, specifically some lumpy mashed potatoes, and Kathy stormed out. When she came back, Jimmy had written "The Wind Cries Mary" to apologize. To her, he wasn't a legend. He was just a funny guy who would buy a toy pony for a friend's baby. As his fame grew, the scene around Jimmy got darker and more crowded with groupies and hangers-on. His long-term relationship with Kathy ended in 1969, and by 1970, he was seeing a German figure skater named Monika Dannemann. Monika was the one with him during his final hours. She later told the story of how they spent a quiet evening in her apartment at the Samarkand Hotel, sharing a meal and some wine. They visited friends and stayed up late, talking until they eventually fell asleep. The next morning, September 18, 1970, the music stopped. Monika found Jimmy unresponsive. He was rushed to the hospital, but it was too late. He was pronounced dead just after noon. Monika later claimed he had taken 9 of her sleeping pills, a dose far higher than anyone should ever take. It was a tragic, quiet end for a man who lived so loudly. Jimmy had struggled with drugs and alcohol throughout his career, and in the end, the lifestyle that gave him everything finally took its toll. He left behind a complicated legacy, a trail of broken hearts, and a warning that even the brightest stars can burn out far too soon. But while the women in his life saw the gentle man behind the legend, the music industry saw a machine that needed to keep running. As the emotional support of his inner circle began to fall apart, the pressure to perform turned his final 12 months into a desperate race against a clock he couldn't see. Running out of time. Why the world's greatest guitarist barely recorded in his final year. The death of Jimi Hendrix remains one of the greatest tragedies in the history of rock and roll. Even decades later, it's a story wrapped in mystery and dark rumors. Officially, he died on September 18, 1970, after suffocating in his sleep while intoxicated by sleeping pills. But from the very start, people had questions. Some wondered if it was suicide, while others whispered about a dark conspiracy, claiming his manager had a hand in it because a dead legend is often worth more than a living artist. While we might never know the full truth of those final moments, we do know that the year leading up to his death was a total roller coaster that pushed him to the edge. For 3 years, Jimmy had been on a non-stop ride of fame, releasing 3 iconic albums and becoming a global icon. But by his final year, the wheels were starting to come off. The fun was gone, and everything felt like a struggle. Usually, a musician at his level would be constantly in the studio, but in his last year, Jimmy barely recorded anything. He seemed lost, unsure of where he wanted his music to go next. It didn't help that his band was a revolving door of musicians. After the original Jimi Hendrix experience broke up, he never found that same solid ground again. Jimi started giving conflicting stories to everyone he met. He tried to fire his manager and work with a jazz producer, but that fell apart quickly. About 9 months before the end, he told people he wanted to stop being a lead singer and just focus on playing the blues. Then, he told his girlfriend he wanted to vanish for 2 years and only play acoustic guitar. Even Mike Nesmith from the Monkees remembers Jimi saying he wanted to move toward R&B. He knew he needed a massive change of direction to save himself, but he was running out of time to figure out what that change was. While his music was in shambles, his legal life was a nightmare. In May 1969, Jimi flew into Canada to play for 10,000 fans, but he ended up leaving the airport in handcuffs. Customs agents found he, N and #H in his luggage. He was facing 2 charges that could have landed him in prison for 14 years. When the trial finally happened, Jimi claimed a fan had given him a bottle as a gift, and he just tossed it in his bag without looking. It sounds crazy now, but back then, airport security wasn't what it is today. During the trial, Jimi told the jury he had grown out of his drug habit. We now know that was a complete lie. In fact, a fan later admitted she had actually given him Marie, right before he walked into that very courtroom. Somehow, the jury believed him, and after 8 hours of talk, they found him not guilty. He was a free man, but the stress of the trial and the weight of his secret habits were clearly wearing him down. Then, there was the physical toll of the road. Exactly 13 months before he died, Jimi gave his legendary performance at Woodstock. After that, he tried to take a break, but his manager kept pushing him to tour because that's where the money was. From April 1970 until his death, Jimi was on a relentless, non-stop schedule. He played massive festivals in Hawaii and Georgia, but the spark was fading. At the Isle of Wight Festival in August, things started to go wrong. There was radio interference during his songs, and the crowd didn't want to hear his new ideas. They just wanted the old hits. The real breaking point came in September 1969 at a festival in West Germany. It was a total disaster. Biker gangs were robbing fans, a stagehand was actually shot while Jimi was performing, and the violence got so bad that Jimi had to flee the stage for his own safety. It was a long way from the love and peace he used to preach. Less than 48 hours after a final quiet jam session at a London jazz club, the journey was over. Jimi Hendrix was gone, leaving the world to wonder if he was a man who had simply run out of time, or a man who had seen too much of the dark side of the dream. But even for a rock star whose life was already a blur of chaos, the final 12 months held secrets that felt more like a crime thriller than a concert tour. While the music industry was squeezing him for every last dime, a shadowy underworld was closing in, leading to a bizarre disappearance that blurred the lines between a drug-fueled haze and a targeted hit. The high-speed kidnapping. Why Jimi Hendrix didn't even realize he'd been abducted. Exactly a year before he died, just as the dust from Woodstock was settling, something bizarre happened that felt like a scene out of a gangster movie. Jimi Hendrix was kidnapped, or at least that's how the story goes. It's a mystery that didn't even surface until 2011, and it's known as the Lost Weekend. According to a former mobster, Jimi was at a wild party looking for drugs when 2 guys offered him cocaine and lured him to a second location. They weren't just fans, they were looking for a payday. They contacted Jimi's team and demanded his entire record contract as ransom. The strangest part? Jimi was apparently so high that he didn't even realize he was being held against his will. Eventually, a real mob boss stepped in with some heavy threats, and Jimi was returned safely without a dime being paid. Some people think the whole thing was a setup by his manager, Michael Jeffrey, just so he could swoop in and look like a hero. Whether it was a real hit or a staged drama, it showed just how chaotic and dangerous Jimi's world had become. He was a man drifting through a reality that was increasingly out of his control. While his career was under fire, his personal life was just as messy. Jimi may have left behind children, but he never got to be a father to them. There was Tamika James, born in 1967. Her mother, Diane Carpenter, was only 16 and didn't even tell Jimi about the baby until months later. For the last year of his life, Jimi was being pushed to take a paternity test. He even met with his lawyer to discuss it just 3 days before he died, but the clock ran out before the needle ever hit his arm. Then there was James Sundquist in Sweden. A Swedish court later ruled that Jimi was his father, but because no DNA test was ever done, the U.S. courts didn't recognize it. Jimi died before the boy was even a year old, never having held his son. In that final year, Jimi wasn't just juggling lawsuits, he was juggling a dizzying number of girlfriends. He was living at a frantic pace, surrounding himself with women like Kirsten Nefer, Devin Wilson, and Carmen Barrero. He seemed to be searching for some kind of stability, but he was doing it in the most unstable way possible. In a strange, desperate move, he actually proposed to at least 3 different women in his final year. He gave Barrero an engagement ring for Christmas in 1969, and in his very last week alive, he asked both Kirsten Nefer and Monica Dannemann to marry him. It was as if he knew time was short and was trying to anchor himself to anyone who would stay. But his heart always seemed to drift back to his ex, Kathy Etchingham. She was the one person who didn't seem to want anything from him other than his well-being. When he was at his lowest, his team would call her just to calm him down. He even flew to London in early 1970 to try and convince her to leave her new husband and come back to him. On the very day he died, he reached out to her one last time, inviting her to his hotel. She never showed up. You have to wonder how history might have changed if she had walked through that door. By the end, the pressure was carving lines into his soul. The stress gave him ulcers and a hair-triggered temper. He was drinking heavily and using drugs to numb the pain of a world that wouldn't stop asking for more. On his last Christmas in 1969, a night that started with expensive gifts and celebration turned into a nightmare. He became violent with his girlfriend, Carmen Barrero, eventually hitting her with a bottle so hard she had to be rushed to the emergency room. It wasn't the Jimi the world knew, it was a man who was physically and mentally falling apart. The public finally saw the mask slip a month later at Madison Square Garden. It was 3 a.m. by the time Jimi hit the stage for a benefit concert. He was clearly under the influence of something heavy. After struggling through 2 songs, he started muttering gibberish to the crowd, then simply sat down in front of his amp and stopped playing. The music had died right there on stage, in front of thousands of people. He had to be led away, a silent shadow of the god who had once set his guitar on fire. The fire was going out, and the end was closer than anyone dared to admit. There's no big rush, the chilling irony of Jimi Hendrix's final interview. As the final week of his life began, Jimi Hendrix seemed to be searching for a way to strip away the rock star mask and return to something pure. It has been over 5 decades since the world lost the man who redefined the electric guitar, yet the words he left behind in those final days continue to haunt the fans who still worship his legacy. Just 7 days before he was found unresponsive in a London hotel, Jimi sat down for an interview that felt less like a promotional chat and more like a manifesto for a future he would never see. He wasn't talking about hit records or flashy outfits. Instead, he was focused on the idea of the electric church, a place where music was a spiritual experience, not a commodity. When asked by Keith Altham about the possibility of playing free concerts, Jimi didn't just agree. He lit up with a rare, genuine excitement. "I can dig that. I can really dig that," he said. He spoke about a world where musicians only collected enough money to cover their expenses from one show to the next, removing the greed that he felt was suffocating his soul. Then he uttered the words that still send a chill down the spine of anyone who knows what happened next. With a calm, unsettling confidence, he looked at the interviewer and said, "We have time. There's no big rush." To the world, it sounded like a man planning for the next decade. In reality, he had fewer than 168 hours left to live. But the real revelation came just 3 days before his death. In his final sit-down, the tone shifted from idealistic to eerily prophetic. Hendrix didn't sound like a man who was afraid of the end. He sounded like someone who had already seen what lay beyond the curtain. He spoke of his exhaustion with the industry, but also of a strange peace. He hinted that he had given everything he could to the Jimi Hendrix the public demanded, and now he was ready to move into something else entirely. It felt like a man saying goodbye to his own legend before the legend finally claimed him. When the news broke on September 18, 1970, the shockwaves changed the music industry forever. Monica Dannemann's frantic call from the Samarkand Hotel marked the end of the greatest instrumentalist of a generation. But while the music stopped, a new battle was just beginning, one over the massive fortune he left behind. Because Jimi died without a will, his estate, worth an estimated $50 million today, fell into the hands of his father, Al. This triggered a decades-long family war that was just as turbulent as Jimi's final year. Al eventually regained the rights to his son's music in 1995, but the family dynamics were fractured beyond repair. Jimi's brother, Leon, found himself at the center of a heartbreaking betrayal. He claimed his father had intended to leave him a $25 million trust fund nicknamed Bodacious, Al's childhood name for him. But in a final, bitter twist, Al signed papers in his last years that cut Leon out of the will entirely. The Hendrix fortune eventually landed in the hands of Al's adopted stepdaughter, Jimi Hendrix, leaving the blood relatives of the guitar god on the outside looking in. It's a tragic postscript to a life that was already filled with so much pain. Jimi wanted music to be free. He wanted a world without greed where time was on his side. But in the end, time was the one thing he couldn't buy, and the money he left behind only served to tear apart the family he had tried so hard to support. The final message of Jimi Hendrix wasn't just about the music. It was a warning about the cost of fame and the fragility of a life lived in the spotlight. He told us there was no big rush, perhaps because he already knew that where he was going, time no longer mattered. He left us with a legacy of fire and sound and a final interview that proves that even at the very end, he was looking for a way to step out of the noise and into the light. What Jimi Hendrix song is your favorite till this very day? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Also, click the next video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.